Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Kentuckian Podcast. Enjoy. Today, I want to talk with you for a few minutes about the concept of benevolent tyranny. The United States has suffered great traumas as a country, and quite frankly, in many ways, is bleeding out. Now, one of the main groups responsible for this trauma, what you might term the far left, has many proposed solutions. Virtually, if not literally all of which involve extensive and intrusive government oversight and control over every aspect of mine and your lives. But before we dig into this concept, I want to take a moment to memorialize one of the men who've done more than just about anyone in staunching these wounds to our country. As many of you probably already know, earlier this week, Rush Limbaugh passed away due to complications from the lung cancer he had been fighting. Rush Limbaugh was one of the most influential Americans in history, reaching millions upon millions of people every week, and was a staunch conservative voice that was a great influence over my life personally. I grew up listening to him on the radio, and he will be sorely missed. We may have lost him at a critical time in our history, maybe when we needed him most of all. But it's up to us to carry on his legacy. The principles he taught and tried to live will live on through us. He was not a perfect man, but he never let his failures keep him from pushing forward. He gave most of his life to trying to avert the disasters that seemed just on the horizon, and we must carry the torch. Never give up hope, friends. We have the truth, just like Rush spent his life trying to spread. As I finish this tribute to Mr. Limbaugh, I would like to leave you with the words of George Washington as we think about the truth that he tried so hard to teach so many people and helped many of us. George Washington said, "There's but one straight course, and that is to seek truth and pursue it steadily." Coming back to the object at hand, let's dig into the nature of the benevolent tyranny pursued by many today as the viable and moral political action that should be taken. First point is why it's not really a viable action. To start, we need to consider that tyranny, benevolent or otherwise, is not tenable in any long-term situation. We've already discussed this in more detail, so we will not spend a huge amount of time on this. If you'd like to delve more into this topic, I'd recommend that you check out episode 4 of the Kentuckian on why socialism and communism always fails. Tyranny, best illustrated in the extreme tyrannies of the Soviet Union, Maoist China, and Nazi Germany, with unfortunately far too many other examples waiting in the wings of history, never works because it's contrary to human nature. And again, we've talked about this before, but we'll talk about it a little bit more. We are designed by God to function as individuals first, but with a solemn responsibility to our fellow man. We are neither totally individualistic nor totally collectivistic. There has to be a balance. And tyranny, which focuses on collectivism, and as a side point, anarchy only focuses on individualism, disrupts the natural balance of human interaction, rationalization, and intrinsic motivation. Therefore, tyranny, as we'll see, particularly benevolent tyranny, is totally untenable in the long term. The next point I want to talk about, and this will probably be the longest one for us, is why it's not really moral. And this is really important because, and as again, we've actually kind of brushed on some of this before, the morality, the moral superiority, the what I term in episode 4 is the cult of self-righteousness and related philosophies are really the fuel that fuels this crazy idea for tyranny and how to achieve what they consider equity. And there's a particular brand of this benevolent tyranny that's espoused in this country, and we can describe it in many different ways, but I think it would be best summed up in the phrase social justice. I think we've all probably heard that, social justice warriors, people pushing for social justice, all those different things. It claims that there's innate injustice in American and most, if not all, other societies based on concepts like racism, ableism, sexism, white privilege, etc., coupled with the belief that people, individually and or working together with their friends and neighbors, with their communities, are totally unable to rectify these injustices. According to them, the only option for real rectification is government intervention at every level of life, now including your private life, how you raise your children, and what you think. Through terrifying practices like affirmative action, prioritizing certain groups like people with black skin for many benefits and privileges, segregation, and yes, I said segregation. They are pushing for that, especially on college campuses. Forcing biological females to compete with biological males, kicking adults completely out of their children's education process, or at least attempting to do so at this point. And perhaps the worst of all, and this is just an example, teaching people that objective thinking and absolute truth is racist. Yes, all this is either happening recently, has happened recently, or is happening right now. They're pushing this kind of nonsense. Yes, they are saying that objective thinking and absolute truth is racist. Not that it's wrong for some weird philosophical reason, that it's racist. That objective thinking, that logical processes are racist. I am not making that up. The article came out, I think, just last week. They were talking about, I forget who did it. I need to look that back up, actually, probably posted somewhere. But it's absolutely insane. They're literally teaching that you cannot think objectively without being a racist, that it's a product of white culture, or they phrased it something like that. The government, they believe that with all these issues, with all these potential quote-unquote solutions, the government can rectify or provide justice for social ills, hence the term social justice, right? But as we kind of go through this, you must understand this is a brief survey of many of these issues. We could spend a lot of time on any of these subjects, and like I said, we've talked about some in other podcasts already. We just don't have the time to go into too much detail here, but this is the kind of insanity that they are pushing now, and it's only gotten worse. It's kind of interesting with some of these things where they said, people said early on, it's going to get crazier, right? If you take it to its logical end, it's going to lead to crazy things like, I don't know, females being forced to compete with biological males, and said that they're equals and that biological males should be able to go into females' locker rooms. If you had asked somebody 10 years ago, probably 5 years ago, maybe, but definitely 10 years ago, if that was actually realistic, and they'd call you crazy. And yet we're dealing with it right now, not only as a issue that's being pushed on a societal level, but it's being pushed by the chief executive. Biden is pushing this nonsense. He signed an executive order, I think it was his first day in office, that was trying to force biological females to compete with biological males, to treat them as the exact same. And their biology just doesn't add up. Again, we could talk about all this for ages, but we don't have time to get into too much detail on any one issue. We are focusing on the concept of benevolent tyranny. But these are the kind of societal ills that they're trying to fix, and they're trying to fix, quote unquote, with government intervention, and extreme, ridiculous government intervention. All right. So as we continue to think about this, many, if not most of the supporters of this kind of benevolent tyranny that's pushed today will attempt to take a moral high ground. They'll do this with transgenderism, homosexuality, white privilege, racism, all these different things that we've mentioned. However, their beliefs are factually false. You want to talk about, like, with the racism, police brutality, or black people getting shot more than white people, all this kind of stuff. It's just factually false, and a lot of it, and this goes great with the transgenderism, because they study the hormone levels, muscle mass levels, bone density, all these different things. Most of it can be demonstrated through straight numbers to be either totally untrue. So, like, it's demonstrated as false, or the exact opposite being true in whatever case. For example, the gender wage gap. They say that women are paid less than men on average, and that it's a societal ill that needs to be fixed with governmental regulation. Don't hear about it as much as you used to, but it's a pretty common thing still. If you look at the numbers, straight numbers, not only can it be easily demonstrated that it doesn't exist, that women don't get paid less than men, but actually, if anything exists, if there's any inequality, the opposite is true, in that men per hour are actually paid less than women on average. Yeah, that's what the numbers show. Now they'll go in there and they'll say, and again, we don't have time to go into too much detail. They say, but they look at, like, total income for women on average as opposed to total income for men. But they are manipulating the data so that it doesn't show that accounting for women working less hours on average than men. So if you actually break up that total income into per hour payments, women are actually paid more than men. But they say the exact opposite. They say that women are paid less than men, and it's a societal ill that government has to come in and fix. This is the kind of insanity, right? And that's kind of the mild stuff, right? Again, the transgenderism is a great issue, right, with the women's sports, because you can easily demonstrate that they have way more muscle mass, more lung capacity, more bone density. The hormones don't really make that much of a difference. If you're, again, we don't have time to get into it. I don't want to get too far off track, but I think you all know what I'm talking about. And they're claiming the moral high ground because of this stuff, except that it's just not true. It's not like, oh, this is kind of up for debate, and my take on it, I think, is a better take than your take on it, right? As a liberal saying to a conservative or whatever. No, it's just wrong. It's just false. Most of the time, the issues are completely non-existent. And like we pointed out with the gender wage gap, if anything, it's in the opposite direction, right? Again, we don't have too much time to get into detail, but literally, this is a common phrase, but literally the numbers just don't add up for most of what they believe, most of what they claim are societal ills. The black people getting shot more than white people. A white man is more, I think it's 6 times more likely to get shot by a police officer than a black man. And that's like just based off the numbers, right? Just looking at how many of each quote unquote group got shot past years, just the numbers, right? It's not somebody's opinion on it. It's just the numbers. It's just the records. But that doesn't matter to these people. And this next statement that I'm going to say to kind of cap off sort of the insanity that they're saying, thinking about what they're claiming as moral high ground on, and yet they're literally ignoring the facts. This next statement is totally unironic. I'm not joking. They are now teaching in certain areas that numbers and math are racist. I'm not making that up. Article came out last week about it, detailing these recommended new math teaching practices in Oregon about how asking for the right answer is a form of white supremacy, that sort of nonsense. They are literally teaching that math is racist and that it needs to be taught, and not taught in a different way, taught in a way that you don't get right answers. So let that sink in for a minute. These people literally deny absolute truth, any truth at all. And they espouse ideas that are fundamentally opposed to how humans are programmed to function. We're talking about socialism, collectivism, and then they claim the moral high ground because conservatives in general are realistic about human nature. They're realistic about biology. They're realistic about how people have intrinsic motivators given to them by God. How dare someone work for a living and receive compensation for their labors? That's absolutely disgusting. That's what they're saying. If you phrased it that way, they'd be like, well, yeah, of course people deserve compensation for their labors. In fact, they would go so far as to say that we're pushing for just compensation for people's labors by taking money from other people and giving it to someone who didn't earn it. One more thing before we move on. This is to highlight the contradiction in their moral superiority complex, is to look at one particular instance of their beliefs in practice, what they claim to be pushing for, the social justice, fixing the societal ills of the world, of our country in particular, particularly by forcing the government to do certain things. All right, we have been dealing since last summer, at least last summer, with quote-unquote peaceful protests. That's how they're termed by the media. Violent, destructive riots in virtually every, if not every, major city and many smaller towns in the United States. And you think this isn't just a few towns out on the West Coast, right? This is everywhere. Louisville, Kentucky. I'm from around that area. I was originally born in that area. They've been dealing with riots for months and months. I think it's finally died down some. In Western Kentucky, and you all probably never heard of this town, but Murray, Kentucky, a small town, about 20,000 people, and the college is in. There's a college in Murray. Had a riot here. About 200 people. Somebody got killed because if I understand correctly, they moved into one of the main roads in town and they started beating up on cars. And then the police finally stepped in and they were using tear gas. And somebody apparently had a weak heart or something like that. And the tear gas caused cardiac arrest. They died, if I understand correctly. In a small town out in the middle of rural Western Kentucky. It's happening all over the place. And it's much worse in many other places. They've been clear. These people that are quote-unquote peaceful protesting, that are rioting, have been clear about wanting exactly the kind of tyranny we've been talking about, this benevolent tyranny, and to push for it, to push for this benevolent tyranny, this government to fix everything. They've been burning, looting, beating, and killing for months. Millions and millions, if not billions of dollars worth of property damage, been savage beatings, and even murders to push for their quote-unquote morally superior beliefs. Just look up some of the videos, folks. They speak for themselves. And if you do look them up, if you haven't seen them, I would caution parents if about letting your kids listen to them. There's horrid language, and it is par for the course with these people. Definitely might want to look for a censored version. It's pretty bad. Look up some pictures of parts of some of these cities afterwards, or when the rioting is over and died down. And again, I mean this totally unironically. I mean this completely literally. They look like war zones. Ash covering everything, destroyed and burned out buildings, melted hulks of destroyed cars. It's awful. And I say this next part with all seriousness. Some of them, and again, I am not using this lightly. Some of the pictures remind me startlingly of the pictures from the aftermath of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Folks, this is happening right now, and it's up to us to do something about it. We cannot bury our heads in the sand. They've stated openly now that they are coming after conservatives. And while you can say, oh, they're just talking, I would remind you that they have been literally going after conservatives this last year. Many of these riots, if anybody of a different opinion has showed up, well, that's how some people have gotten killed or beaten or their cars destroyed or damaged. Just because you're white or just because you dare say an idea that's different to what they're saying. It's happened, and it's going to keep happening. This is serious, folks. We have to do something. We must be brave. They're going to come for us no matter what. They've said that. They've demonstrated that. If you're conservative, if you think, maybe not even conservative, if you think differently than they do, even if you're relatively liberal, that's not good enough for them because, they're morally superior. I'll be coming out with another episode soon of practical things that you can do to start making a difference, but I'll leave that where it is for now. I talk about a lot of serious issues on this podcast, and there's a lot of serious issues going on right now. I by no means believe that we can't do something about it. Every one of us can make a difference if we're willing to try, if we're willing to do something. Things may be bad, but things have been bad other times in history. Things have been bad other times in this country. But it's up to us to decide what we're going to do about it. Again, I'm going to have a whole nother episode talking about that sort of thing. But we'll move on. And the last main point I wanted to make is why this must be rooted out and eliminated at its philosophical core. Now, we're going to get into some stuff with this. But I want to make one point before we get into, I think, what I'm going to spend more time on. The ultimate issue with this philosophy, and we'll kind of talk about some other aspects of it, but the ultimate issue is because of the pedestal that government's placed on. The way that it's supposed to control everyone's lives, right? It's supposed to dictate how we live, what we think, who we marry, all these different things, how our children are raised. It is idolatry. It is putting government in the place of God. That is why tyrannies like the Soviet Union, like Nazi Germany, like Maoist China, pick any tyranny you like, basically, has always been opposed to religion, Christianity, and religion in general. Because they are the ones that are the ultimate authority. They are the ones that have the final say. They're the ones that tell you how to live. They're the ones that dictate reality to you. That's really part of the core issue. And we need to be aware of that. The real issue is a lack of God. The real issue is a lack of righteousness. And again, I'm going to address some of this stuff more in a different episode. But we have to remember that. And to that point, as we think about how people are reacting to this, a little more of a specific example, we keep that in mind. But we must realize, and I would venture to say that most, at least decent students of history already know, that no tyranny is ever a good thing. It never really works, right? It never has. It's why socialism and communism always fails. We talked about that. There's reasons that tyranny doesn't work on the long term. But this quote-unquote benevolent tyranny is much worse than just your typical everyday tyranny, if you will. Now, before you start objecting, saying, but there's a lot of good people out there that are on that side that are just trying to help, or something similar to that. They're just trying to make a difference. They're good people. They want to do right. Let me read this quote to you from C.S. Lewis. If you're not familiar with him, he was a very influential author. He wrote works like The Chronicles of Narnia, The Screwtape Letters, and Mere Christianity. He said, of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely expressed for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. People that are pushing falsehood, tyranny, and so on with a genuine desire to help are the most dangerous. And in case, real quick on that quote, cupidity is basically greed or avarice. These people, these genuinely concerned people, are the most dangerous. We have to have truth first. We have to focus on truth first, or compassion has the exact opposite of its desired effect. I would take it a step further than Mr. Lewis, because the moral superiority complex is fueled by people that genuinely want to do good. No one's doubting many of these people's intentions. There are people that really want to make a difference. They really are concerned about these things. And certainly, there are people that don't really care. I believe that the argument can be made that those in charge of such movements as this have no inkling of such desire. They're power hungry to their core. But the actual agents of this tyranny are actually the most dangerous because they actually believe in what they're doing. There's always going to be power hungry people. But the genuinely deluded are the medium through which evil takes hold. No politician would campaign that he desires to take control of people's lives, steal their paychecks, put them into total submission, eliminate any choice they would like to make that's not approved of by the government, brainwash their children, and so on. But they will campaign on helping the common man, rectifying social ills, making sure children know the truth about their past, provide equal opportunity for oppressed classes, taking weapons of war off of our streets, and perhaps one of the worst today, keeping you safe. Folks, too many of us are being played, and we're letting them do it. We have to focus on truth. But before I conclude, I would issue a warning. While we must focus on truth first, we must not forget compassion either. As the Apostle Paul writes about in 1 Corinthians 13, if we have not love, our actions are hollow. The extreme lack of any sort of truth on the other side may drive us to only care about the truth. But we must remember that these lost souls are still souls. They're still people. And we can fall in the same trap they have. We're no better than them. We must simply do what's right. And if we can help them to do the same, we cannot fall into the trap of brutalism that they have. These people that are genuinely trying to help, they're genuinely deluded, but are becoming brutal because of the unnatural philosophy that they espouse, the false philosophy that they espouse. We can fall into that same boat. We can do the exact same thing. Well, they don't have the truth, and then we forget that they're people too, just like they have of so many people that think differently than they do. These people are the most dangerous, though. Without them, the fire of tyranny would sputter and die, especially of benevolent tyranny. They may genuinely want to help, but at the end of the day, they're doing the exact opposite. They are the agents of tyranny. As much as they may not like it, as much as they may not want to, they are the way, the power through which the power hungry actually gain control over people's lives. As we conclude, we would do well to keep in mind that benevolent tyranny is not truly viable, that their moral high ground is quite the opposite of a moral high ground. Their actions demonstrate a lack of moral responsibility, and that benevolent tyranny is extremely dangerous because people are attempting to be benevolent. Misplaced desire to do good is the fuel that feeds this sort of tyranny. I hope you like this episode of The Kentuckian. Kind of a serious topic, but then again, there's many serious things going on today. Please share this podcast. Tell your friends. Spread the word. I appreciate y'all's support so much. We can grow this thing together. Things, again, may seem dark at times, but we have to try. We have to do something. We have to work together, and I know that we can make a difference. And I'm trying to do my part. May not be much, but maybe it helps somebody. If you'd like to support me in a more personal way, you can contribute directly to me on Anchor or visit my Patreon. That'll be linked in the description below for this episode. As always, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or topics that you'd like me to cover, please reach out to me. And remember that as long as you and I are doing the right thing, we can make a real difference in this world. The Kentuckian, trying to make a difference one person at a time.